amongst other deco revellers, with signs around their necks, we're wanting donations, albeit comically. It's still a little bit sort of inappropriate given the current climes and the attitudes towards actual homeless people.
Yeah, we can see the dots you've joined. Does the depression dinner, though, mock the homeless, however unintentionally, or does it just reflect the past? What do you think? What impression do you get?
I've always found it just a bit uneasy. Deco Weekend is a great thing. It brings thousands of people to Napier and Hawke's Bay, and it's great to see the city so vibrant. But just this whole paying money to be poor for an evening just isn't the best in my sort of moral compass.
Actually, can I ask the panellists that?
Well, it almost goes back to my little rave about what's funny and what's acceptable and it's really just a knee-jerk response to it. Something's offensive or it makes you feel uneasy. If it's offensive, it makes you feel uneasy. It's your own knee-jerk response, and it's a whole lot of things like you're going. It's almost like I'm rubbing in the face that I can look like you and pretend to be like you, while you actually are you and you are poor, and it speaks to a sort of a lack of caring. And maybe the people that are doing it are feeling a little bit guilty that they're not actually helping the people that are. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I don't know.
Okay, but maybe 5 years ago it was. You wouldn't have thought this way, but now with the homeless problem we've got,
yeah, I guess because then it was very clear that you were replicating something from the 30s, and now it's come around again, and I guess it's just lacking a little of sensitivity. But I always think that's sort of that's kind of airy fairy. If you're feeling bad about perhaps being insensitive towards homeless people, then do something for homeless people.
All right, Lavina, what's your impression of this?
Homelessness is not a new thing to New Zealand. Rough sleeping is definitely not new, but I guess what's new is the fact that it's not just the odd person. There are now, especially in Tauranga, there are now families. There are mums and dads and children that are homeless, and there doesn't seem to be an answer around the corner at the moment for them. I'm not sure if it'll take the government to build more affordable houses, or if we need to reduce the cost of home building, or even maybe tackle property speculators, I'm not sure, but what we do need to do is address the fact that there are homeless people, and it's not necessarily a case of people just attempting to get money from the public because they, so to speak, can't be bothered going out to get a job. There are people that earn minimum wage and all of a sudden they need new tyres on their car, or the car has blown up and they can't come up with $2,000 because their rates are due next week, and they're tossed out of their house and they're left destitute, and they're trying to earn money to keep their family fed, and everyone's right to be sheltered, and that's not the case, and they're desperate. And I think to bring in negative publicity about the fact that all homeless people are just after some money because they can't be bothered getting a job does nothing for the increasing rate of homeless in our country.
So, Andrew, you are of the opinion that maybe this depression dinner should be quietly dropped given the current climate, maybe?
Oh, could be dropped, or maybe the part of the proceeds go to, homeless charities, or the like. You had Kerry Swinnell on yesterday afternoon.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
And a couple of years ago, she and her husband put a drive through, and they ended up making, I think it was about $65,000 through a Give a Little or a Pledge Me thing to try and house homeless families in Napier and Hawke's Bay.
I didn't know they'd raised that much. I knew she'd done some great work. Good to talk with you, Andrew, and thank you for joining us. Andrew Frame, the last guest on the panel. Well, no, not the last guest, because we had our two main guests. Andrew Clay, thank you so much.
Always a pleasure, Jim.
And Lavina Good, always nice to talk to you, Lavina.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Thank you so much, Jim.
That's us, and we are back tomorrow. Thanks for your company, everybody, and Checkpoint with John Campbell is coming right up.
Good, everyone. A very big program tonight. Todd Barclay, The Secret Recording, Memory Troubles, Contradictions and Confusion. We will be looking at that, of course. Auckland Council allows a commercial building off Queen Street to remain open for nearly a year despite a significant fire risk. The fire service says the building is in such a state it will not go in to fight a fire or rescue anyone if a fire breaks out. Tony King on Solid Energy's unmanned exploration of Pike River. Yesterday they reported good progress. Tonight we ask what exactly that means. DHB's on a $38 million blunder in the health sector's funding. And we cross live to Hamilton with the Lions taking on the Chiefs. Do join us after Katrina and the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The political future of National's Clutha Southland MP is in serious doubt. Statements made by Todd Barclay have him at odds with the Prime Minister. This afternoon, Bill English released a statement he made to the police last year, in which he says Mr Barclay told him he had recordings of an electorate staff member criticising him. This morning, Mr Barclay denied recording his staff or speaking to Mr English about it. After saying this morning he couldn't recall who told him about the secret recordings, Mr English told reporters this afternoon he had rechecked his police statement.
I've gone back and checked that statement, which was given in March or April last year. And in that statement I said to the police that Todd Barclay had told me that he had recordings of his staff criticising him.
Bill English. The police say they may reopen their investigation of the matter. The case was closed last year because they considered they had insufficient evidence to prosecute Mr Barclay, who declined to be questioned. The police now say officers will assess the relevance of any new information brought to their attention. It's emerged that district health boards have considered a vote of no confidence in senior leadership at the Health Ministry over a funding blunder. $38 million was wrongly allocated and some boards have been asked to repay. Labour's health spokesperson David Clark told Parliament this afternoon the Director General of Health, Chai Chua, initially told DHBs they could keep the extra money but then demanded it back.
This is a sector that is distressing of the leadership in the Ministry of Health. That important sector that delivers the healthcare that New Zealanders need. Those people at the coalface are being let down by the leadership, the senior leadership in the ministry, and the lack of leadership.
David Clark. The Health Minister has blamed ministry officials for the blunder but says he still has confidence in the Director General. The family of the man arrested over yesterday's attack on worshippers outside a London mosque say they're in shock. One person was killed and 9 others injured when a van was driven into people on the pavement. Witnesses say the driver, who was tackled to the ground by passers-by, was shouting he wanted to kill all Muslims. He's been identified as Darren Osborne, a 47-year-old father of 4 who lived in Cardiff. His mother has spoken of her horror at his involvement.
I'm not going to defend him, but it's my son, and it's a terrible, terrible shock. And it's not just robbing the bank, or it's an atrocity. And I just, at the moment in time, I can't cope with it. I can't.
The mother of Darren Osborne, who's likely to face charges of terrorism. The police in Argentina believe they've uncovered the biggest collection of Nazi artefacts in the country's history. Among the 75 items found hidden in a house near Buenos Aires are a bust of Adolf Hitler, magnifying glasses with swastikas, and a macabre medical device used to measure head size. The police say they were discovered in a room off a hidden passage covered by a bookshelf. It's believed the items belonged to high-ranking Nazis in Germany during the Second World War. The former All Black Zach Guildford says he hit rock bottom a year ago. Guildford's journey back to professional rugby has taken another step forward with his signing to play for Waikato in the provincial competition. The 28-year-old Guildford played the last of his 11 tests in 2012. Alcohol and mental health problems led to a series of off-field difficulties that culminated in the New South Wales Waratahs terminating his contract last year. He slowly got his life back on track, but admits he contemplated suicide.
I definitely had those thoughts. I was in a pretty bad situation where I come back from Waratahs and I wasn't in a good headspace. So I need to surround myself with family and good people through that time, and that's what helped me get through. And after a couple of months, I picked up the rugby ball again and realised I still loved it, and managed to get myself back into a position, headspace, where I can reach my full potential again.
Rugby player Zach Guildford. It's 5:04. The All Blacks remain confident skipper Kieran Reid will be fit for the first test against the Lions in Auckland on Saturday. He hasn't played since breaking a thumb playing for the Crusaders in April. Despite his lack of match play, assistant coach Ian Foster says Reid will take the field so long as he comes through training over the rest of the week, and might have even been able to play against Samoa last week.
He's desperate to play, and a little bit touch and go for last week, whether there was a chance to get him a few minutes under his belt. Didn't happen, but we're pretty satisfied. He's had his first real solid hit out with contact and everything, and hopefully he comes through that really well, and it becomes a reasonably easy decision.
Ian Foster. Lions coach Warren Gatland says it'll be a special moment for him when his side lines up against his hometown Super Rugby side, the Chiefs, in Hamilton tonight.
If you cut me open, I'll probably bleed red, yellow and black sort of thing. I'm very proud of my roots and really looking forward to what should be a great occasion and a fantastic atmosphere and a proper rugby ground as well.
Warren Gatland. The former Kiwis Rugby League international Sean Kenny Dowell has escaped conviction despite pleading guilty to drug possession in court in Sydney today. Kenny Dowell, who was sacked by his NRL club, the Sydney Roosters, earlier this month, was caught with 0.5 gram of cocaine at a Sydney nightclub in May. That's the news.
The Greens want to quadruple the refugee intake.
Over the course of the last 30 years, our refugee resettlement numbers have actually remained exactly the same. We took on more refugees during World War II than we do now.
Andrew Little is cautious.
Compounding problems that we've already got, like a shortage of housing, like traffic congestion, like overcrowded schools.
And what do the refugees have to say?
These people need to be provided support to be able to become producers, not really simply just to get them resettled, but also to get them to be positive contributors of the society.
Settle in with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson. Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the National Bowel Screening Programme's about to be rolled out. We talk to the clinical director about who it will capture and the likely impact on one of our most preventable and treatable cancers. And after 10, improving eye care in the Pacific with Samoa's sole optometrist, Erna Takazawa. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Cloudy periods with showers over Northland and Coromandel. Rain with heavy falls and northeast gales developing about Northland tomorrow morning and spreading elsewhere later. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumaranui, Taranaki, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with isolated showers developing in Waikato and Bay of Plenty. Gisborne, mostly cloudy, showers developing tomorrow night. Hawke's Bay to Wairarapa, also Whanganui and Taihape through to Wellington, mainly fine. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago, Southland, also Nelson, Buller and Westland, north of Hokitika. Mainly fine, cloud increasing later tomorrow and scattered rain developing about Otago and Southland in the evening. For the remainder of Westland and Fiordland, showers developing overnight, turning to rain tomorrow afternoon with heavy falls. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods today, mainly fine tomorrow. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Coming up on the programme tonight, a building in the very centre of downtown Auckland considered such a fire risk the fire department wouldn't enter it to fight a fire, and Solid Energy's unmanned exploration of Pike River. Yesterday we were told it was making good progress. What exactly does that mean? But first, Nationals Clutha Southland MP Todd Barclay. Mr Barclay has made statements today which directly contradict his boss, the Prime Minister Bill English, about a secret recording of electorate office staff. In a statement to the police, Mr English said Todd Barclay had told him he had recordings of Glenys Dixon criticising him. And in a text message obtained by Newsroom, Mr English said, quote, he left a dictaphone running that picked up all conversations in the office. But as recently as this morning, Todd Barclay was refuting any allegation that he'd recorded his staff and also saying he did not talk to Mr English about it. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Early last year it emerged that 2 of Todd Barclay's electorate staff had resigned along with his electorate chair. At the time, the then Prime Minister John Key and his Deputy Bill English said they had no concerns about the resignations, saying there was often a changeover in staff with a new MP. But it later became clear that one of his electorate agents, Glenys Dixon, had laid a complaint with the police, claiming Todd Barclay had secretly recorded her in the office. This morning, the news website Newsroom revealed text messages between Bill English and the former electorate chair, Stuart Davey, in which Mr English stated a dictaphone had been left running in Mr Barclay's office that picked up all the conversations. The text message went on to say the settlement paid to Glenys Dixon was larger than normal because of the privacy breach. This morning, Mr English told reporters that statement was based on second-hand information.
So I was relaying what I had heard, and I can't recall where that came from. this is now a couple of years ago.
Meanwhile, just metres away from the media stand-up with Mr English, Todd Barclay was also being questioned by reporters.
Obviously, I've seen the allegations. Again, there's nothing new than what's already been out there. I'm happy to answer any questions to the best that I can, but there is an employment confidentiality agreement which will obviously prevent me from saying some things.
Has that represented the situation honestly in terms of secret recordings?
Yes.
So, John, you didn't make any secret recordings?
No, I mean, as I say, I've seen the allegations that have been made by Mrs Dixon, and the police have investigated quite thoroughly, obviously. I've gone through quite a robust local transparent process too, which was my reselection, which I won quite convincingly. So, my people and supporters down there clearly see it for what it is.
Did you use a dictaphone to record one of your staff members?
Look, I've seen the allegations and I totally refute them.
So, to sum this morning up, Bill English said he'd only heard second-hand about the allegations and Todd Barclay outright rejected them. However, just a couple of hours later, Mr English made another statement to media on his way into Parliament.
So as a result of the questions this morning, I said that I had made a statement to the police and I'd go back and check it. I've gone back and checked that statement, which was given in March or April last year. And in that statement I said to the police that Todd Barclay had told me that he had recordings of his staff criticising him.
Mr English was asked whether he'd been misled by Todd Barclay.
It's a matter for him to account for his statements. I'm telling you what my statement was, and the statement I made was to the police, who then had the opportunity to investigate all aspects of the allegations.
As Prime Minister, Bill English cannot technically force Mr Barclay to resign as an electorate MP, but he will be facing serious questions about today's revelations, his political future, and the pressure that's come to bear on Mr English as a result. Glenys Dixon refused to comment when RNZ visited her home today, and Stuart Davey could not be reached for comment. But RNZ asked people in Gore what they thought should happen to Mr Barclay.
And certainly not on money being paid to as hush money, basically. No.
You think he should stand down, or is it not?
I do think so. We do need MPs that we can trust.
No, I don't think it's good enough. He should be disciplined, at the end of the day, we live in a democracy. It's got to be proved. And, if he's proved, out he goes. See ya.
I think it was obvious from the timing of what was going on when there was another election all round the whole of the electorate, that he was aware that he had done wrong. They had two very good people up there working in the office, excellent. And I think that they lost their jobs unfairly, because it sounds, from what I'm reading, that he was very, dishonest.
The police say they closed the case as they had insufficient evidence to prosecute Mr Barclay, who did not cooperate with the investigation. Todd Barclay is not returning RNZ's calls this afternoon and avoided media after question time. Atuiti whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Chris Bramwell.
Prime Minister Bill English was unavailable for a checkpoint interview today. The invitation stands. Todd Barclay wasn't picking up his phone and hasn't responded to our repeated messages. The invitation to be interviewed stands. National Party President Peter Goodfellow promised to ring us back. We're still waiting for the call. We'd love to receive it. Mr Goodfellow, we asked police for an interview over their decision to not obtain warrants or proceed with the prosecution of Mr Barclay. They too declined. And the Labor candidate for Clutha Southland, Shree Chapman, declined to comment, saying she's focused on running a positive campaign to change the government. We would love to talk to Prime Minister Bill English, Todd Barclay or National Party President Peter Goodfellow. Our phones are standing by. It's 14 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Auckland Council has allowed a commercial CBD building to remain open for nearly a year, despite acknowledging it's likely someone will die if it catches fire. The Strand Arcade, 5 stories high, right smack bang in the middle of Queen Street, is such a fire risk the fire service says it won't go in to rescue people if there's a fire. It was deemed a dangerous building on June 30th last year. Nearly a year later, the designation is still in effect because the building's owners haven't fixed the extensive problems. But Auckland Council hasn't issued any fines or blocked access to the building. It's just patiently letting the owners fix the problems at their leisure. Our reporter Zach Fleming has more.
With more than a dozen ground floor shops, plus a backpackers and a foreign language school upstairs, there's easily more than 100 people in the Strand Arcade building at any one time. And if a fire breaks out, Auckland Council documents show it's likely some of those people will die or be injured. The council issued a dangerous building notice to the building's 6 owners in June last year, and for context around how serious that is, only 2 are in effect for the whole of Auckland CBD. The other is due to crumbling foundations. Among the problems identified at the Strand, substandard smoke detectors, heat detectors, alarms, emergency lighting systems, ventilation and escape routes.
My understanding was reconstructing disabled inbuilt fire protection, whether it be the alarm system, sprinkler system or taking away fire stops. They were being uncooperative with the TA, being the City Council, and the fire service.
It's so dangerous that if there's a fire, the fire service said it won't send in firemen to fight the fire or to rescue people. It would only send crews to fight it from the street. Boyd Rains has been in the fire service for 34 years and is the Professional Firefighters Union's Auckland Vice President.
I have seen it where a assistant area commander responds to the incident, which in this instance is fairly unusual. To me, that signals a high level of concern by upper management in relation to that building.
The owners were given until Christmas last year to fix the problems, or risk closure and fines of up to $200,000. But the problems weren't fixed, and the building's warrant of fitness expired. So for the whole of 2017, the building's been both dangerous and unwarranted. In March, the council issued a 2-week stern warning, quote, "Further non-compliance will result in prosecution proceedings." 3 months later, though, there's still no WOF and no prosecution was ever launched. Auckland Council's Weather Tightness and Compliance Manager, Sally Gray, says council believe the only imminent risk was with people sleeping inside.
It does take a period of time for those issues to be rectified. So it wasn't the case of dangerous building notice being served on this building and nothing then being done for 12 months. Where the risk was isolated, i.e. no longer sleeping accommodation. Over the period of time leading up till Christmas, the food court was also closed, which further removed any potential fire risk within the building.
It can't just be sleeping though, because the fire service deemed the building so dangerous that they wouldn't go in to rescue people or fight a fire. So it can't just be sleeping.
You would have to ask them why they take that position.
Right.
I simply don't know why they would take that view.
Checkpoint visited every single business inside the Strand Arcade, and not a single employee or owner was aware of the extent of the fire issues. Most were incredibly concerned to learn that not even the fire service would go in if there was a fire. Janet Wang owns the Aspiring Language Institute on the 4th floor. She says she was never told about the fire issues.
When we saw the dangerous building notice, we actually contacted the landlord immediately, just asking what is our situation? Shall we move immediately? Or, we were aware if it's a dangerous building, we need to leave.
So you saw the notice. They didn't tell you. You had to wait until it was pasted up in the bottom lobby.
Yes.
She then asked what was going on with the building's WOF.
We've been told it's going to be after a few weeks, and then after a couple of months, and now it's already how many months? 4 or maybe 5 months.
Janet, sick of being given the runaround, has given notice and is moving her business for the safety of her students. Another business owner, who asked not to be named for fear of retribution from the owners, only learned of the fire risk when Checkpoint contacted her.
When we rent the property, they should tell us about that so we can make the decision, see whether we still want to hear or somewhere else is more safe.
Auckland Council was unsure why any owners weren't informed, as it says it sends tenants relevant documents. The owners of the building declined to be interviewed, but the body corporate, Scope Strata Management, issued a 3-line statement saying it's working with the council and it expects the dangerous building notice to be withdrawn shortly. But several fire engineers and compliance officers who'd worked on the building told Checkpoint they don't believe it'll be warrantable for around 6 months. None would speak on record, as they believed publicly criticising Auckland Council would make it hard or impossible to win future contract bids. Sally Gray from the council says they have nothing to fear and the building will be compliant soon.
Absolutely do not have any cause for concern for speaking out.
Okay, cool. Hey, Sally, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think is quite important to get across?
I would just like to stress again that your view that a dangerous building notice means the entire building is unsafe is actually incorrect.
Well, that's not really my view. It's the New Zealand Fire Service's view. They deem the building to be too unsafe to undertake firefighting and rescue operations. And
you would have to ask them why they have that view.
Right, I'm just saying it's not my view. It's the Fire Service's view.
Thank you for your time.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
20 minutes past 5, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Coming up on the program, the American student in prison in North Korea for stealing a poster has died less than a week after being sent home in a comatose state, and district health boards consider a vote of no confidence in senior leadership at the Ministry of Health after a $38 million blunder in the sector's funding. We'd really love to hear from you tonight. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Don't forget you can watch us. We haven't reminded you of this for a while. We're on Facebook Live, we're at rnz.co.nz/checkpoint. We're also on Freeview Channel 50. And as of a few months ago, we're on Face TV, which is Sky Channel 83. If you are in Todd Barclay's Clutha Southland electorate, we would love to hear from you. Do the revelations of today change your opinion of him as your MP? Last night on Checkpoint, we began an interview with Solid Energy CEO Tony King about a media statement the state-owned enterprise had made about Pike River. The statement was issued yesterday afternoon. It said, and I quote, "The Pike River Mine unmanned exploration project is making good progress." So what progress and how good is it? Last night we began to discuss this with Tony King, but we ran out of time. Mr. King agreed to return to the subject on Checkpoint tonight. I spoke to him earlier this afternoon. So if the project is, quote, making good progress, when will the robot be going in?
We're just working through a detailed timeline for that. We haven't yet finalised the full scope of what is proposed, nor had that approved. And until we've done that and we've worked through with the manufacturer and drilling contractors the timing around that, we can't be definitive, but we would certainly like to have the job completed by Christmas.
Okay, the election is September 23rd. Do you think it will be prior to then?
I think it's unlikely because of the build time for the machine that we wish to use.
Okay, the build time. So does this machine not currently exist?
The particular sort of machine that we're looking at is somewhat modular, so we have to configure it for the particular size hole that we want to put it down and equip it with the sort of cameras and sensors and other things that are appropriate for this task, and so they are built to order rather than available off the shelf.
Who is the manufacturer?
It's an Australian firm, I believe.
Okay, you believe. Do you know who it is?
Yeah, I do. I'd rather not give their name out at this stage.
Why is that?
We have yet to finalise arrangements with them, and I think until we do, it's not appropriate to name them.
So you've yet to finalise arrangements. Does this actually exist as a contract?
No, there's nothing contracted yet. No, this is still at the assessment phase. We're working through the technical issues, the safety issues, the practical issues around it all. We've got a very clear concept of the sort of machine that is available that we believe will fit the requirements.
So you have a clear concept. You don't have a contract. You're unable to tell me the manufacturer's name, although it's clear that there is one that you were talking to. In other words, this is a theoretical exercise at the moment, isn't it? It's not actually happening as we speak.
Well, what we've been tasked with by the government is to conduct an assessment into the technical feasibility and safety of doing this unmanned exploration, and we are a good way through that assessment process, but we've not yet reached the end of it.
Yesterday on Checkpoint you said we're moving forward with this unmanned exploration project, which we think can provide some really useful answers to the family and potentially to investigators. How will it do that?
Well, there has long been speculation that some people may have been in the process of exiting the mine at the time of the explosion, or even tried to exit after the explosion, and are in that part of the drift that hasn't yet been explored. Now, it is speculation. The Royal Commission, when they looked at the location of people, they identified only 2 people in the drift, and they both escaped, and everyone else in the mine. But without actually being able to inspect that area, we won't know for sure, and that is one way in which we might be able to provide some certainty to the families as to whether there is anyone there or not.
Will this robot have the capacity to retrieve material?
That is not the plan at present. It is it's primarily around obtaining video footage and inspecting what we can see as we travel through parts of the drift in the mine.
And how much area do you believe this robot will be able to cover?
The indications are that it can travel perhaps 100 metres from a point of insertion in any direction. So, from a single borehole, we could inspect of the order of 200 metres of roadway. However, that is contingent on the roadway being open. There's no roof walls and not obstructed by debris. And we certainly know that at the far end of the drift, there is a debris field. We don't know how far down the drift that extends, though.
So one borehole, you can go 100 metres in one direction and 100 metres in another direction?
That's correct.
So will there be more than one borehole?
In order to look at that unexplored part of the drift, we will need 2 or 3 boreholes, we believe.
So how long will it take to do that work?
I don't have that information, but you're probably talking a few weeks per borehole.
This sounds to the families like a holding pattern. It sounds to the families like the government driving Solid Energy to do something which actually isn't really something, which may actually not reveal anything, and which may only give them more footage inside the mine that doesn't answer key questions. What happened? Why did it happen? And did people survive that first explosion?
The objectives that we were set are firstly to look for bodies in the drift, and we think that if conditions allow, we should be able to get to a definitive position on that. That is our primary objective.
So is that the primary objective is to find out if there are bodies in the drift?
Yeah. The second and third objectives of the three, the second is in relation to establishing any information which might assist in identifying the cause of the initial explosion, and the third objective is to identify any information that might further mine safety. But in this first stage of work, in the drift, the primary objective is in relation to bodies. We'll see what we find from the point of view of any evidence, but we don't know what we will find.
If you find bodies in the drift, what happens then?
Look, I haven't really no idea. I mean, it's speculative. I think that's a matter that will have to be addressed at the time, should that arise.
But if the key purpose of the robot going in is to look for bodies in the drift, surely there would be some discussion taking place already as you commission the robot, as you spend money on the robot, as you plan this exercise, about what would happen if you find those bodies.
No, well, our brief is to undertake the exploration, and what happens beyond that is outside of our brief.
Are you going to the people who gave you the brief and raising this issue?
Well, I think, why don't we wait and see what is found, John, as to whether it is an issue or not?
Because then that would prolong the process even further, wouldn't it? I mean, if I'm asking you this question now, what do you do if you find the bodies? Wouldn't you be asking the same question of the people who give you the brief?
Well, we haven't. We've been given a task to do, and that is what we will undertake. And, we're not an investigator. We weren't responsible for the explosion that occurred. We're not a regulator. We're an operator, and we've been asked to undertake some particular jobs, and that is what we're doing. We're not funding it. We're not setting that scope. The government has done that for us.
Would you rather someone else was doing this work?
Look, that's an academic question. It falls to us as we are the operator at the site.
Tony King, the CEO of Solid Energy, talking to us earlier this afternoon. Otto Warmbier, the American student who was in prison in North Korea before being returned home in a comatose state less than a week ago, has died. His family says his death at Cincinnati Hospital was the only possible outcome after what it described as the awful, torturous mistreatment the 22-year-old received at the hands of the North Koreans. This report from Jonah Green of Reuters.
Warmbier, a UVA student, was arrested for trying to steal an item bearing a propaganda slogan and was sentenced to 15 years hard labor.
Please, make
He was held for 17 months. The regime said it released him on humanitarian grounds. The 22-year-old returned just last week with a severe brain injury. His family says he was unable to see, speak, or respond to verbal commands. Warmbier's father said Thursday the family did not believe North Korea's explanation for what happened to his son.
Even if you believe their explanation of botulism and a sleeping pill causing the coma, and we don't, there is no excuse for any civilized nation to have kept his condition secret and denied him top-notch medical care for so long.
President Trump noting the somber news Monday.
But at least we got him home to be with his parents. It's a brutal regime, and we'll be able to handle it.
A UN human rights investigator called on North Korea Friday to explain why the American was returned in a coma after more than a year in detention there. This comes amid rising tensions between the U.S. and North Korea, and 3 Americans are still being held captive in the country. A U.S. official said earlier on Monday that the United States was concerned for the welfare of those still in custody, and that, quote, "we definitely would like to see them return home as soon as possible."
That report from Reuters. 29 to 6, you're with Checkpoint. Thank you for being with us. Coming up on the programme, calls for calm in London after yesterday's attack on worshippers outside a mosque. Why 36,000 school children skipped class to go on holiday in term 2 of last year. And Zach Guildford on rebuilding his life and his hopes of becoming an All Black again. But first, in fact, there's a lot still to come on Checkpoint. But before it all, Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The political future of Nationals' Clutha Southland MP is in serious doubt. Statements by Todd Barclay have him at odds with the Prime Minister. Bill English has released a statement he made to the police last year in which he says Mr Barclay told him he had recordings of an electorate staff member criticising him. Mr Barclay has denied recording his staff or speaking to Mr English about it. The police may now reopen their investigation. Auckland Council has allowed a commercial building in Queen Street to remain open despite acknowledging it's likely someone will die or be injured in a fire. The 5-storey Strand Arcade was deemed a dangerous building in June last year, and as such a risk, the fire service will not send in officers to put out a fire or rescue people. Auckland Council told Checkpoint it disagrees with the fire service's assessment. It says work has been done to mitigate the risks and the building is not so unsafe it needs to close. It's emerged that district health boards have considered a vote of no confidence in senior leadership at the Health Ministry over a funding blunder. $38 million was wrongly allocated and some boards have been asked to pay it back. The Health Minister has blamed ministry officials but says he still has confidence in the Director General. The former All Black Zach Guildford says he hit rock bottom a year ago and contemplated suicide. Alcohol and mental health problems led to a series of off-field difficulties that culminated in the New South Wales Waratahs terminating his contract last year. He slowly got his life back on track, signing to play for Waikato in the provincial competition. The Christchurch City Council has confirmed a rates increase of just under 5.5%. Councillors have also voted in favour of free swimming for preschoolers and extra staff to help upkeep parks. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Which is 26 and a half minutes away. Turning to business news now with our business editor Giles Beckford, who's beaming in from Wellington. And Giles, more evidence about how consumers are feeling about the economy long term?
Indeed. Good evening to you, John. It comes from the ANZ Roy Morgan latest monthly consumer confidence survey. It's had a bit of a rebound and it's now at its best level since January of this year. And a bit like yesterday's Westpac quarterly consumer survey, where the near-term view, people are just a little bit hesitant, a little bit reticent about it, perhaps not quite so sure how they currently are faring. But certainly looking 12 months and in the ANZ Bank's case, 5 years ahead, they're saying that they're actually quite gung-ho about it. Now, the ANZ Bank gives a couple of reasons for why that might be the case. First of all, inflation is still quite low, so people are doing quite nicely in their personal finances. Secondly, house prices are still relatively firm, and they don't seem to have had any significant impact on people's sentiment. And the ANZ has quite a nice turn of phrase which says that the Auckland market has gone being from a tiger housing market to a tabby cat. And from that point of view, sentiment is still holding up. And it also suggests that the government's $2 billion lower income families package that was announced in the budget, of course, that will come into effect next April, assuming that National is re-elected and forms the next government. So all those factors combined, making people pretty happy, pretty confident in their outlook. And when combined with the ANZ's business survey, which comes out once a month, then the ANZ combines it all together and says the economy is roaring along. Thank goodness we're not saying it's a rock star.
A local bank is doing that, so you got a result, Giles.
Finally, yes. SBS, it used to be known as the Southland Building Society.
Yeah,
that
that's
goes
right.
back to
That's
1869 was when it started, based in Invercargill. It's transformed itself into a local bank, offering the full range of banking services. It has 16 branches around the country and about 200,000 customers. It's reported an annual profit, $27 million. That compares with last year's, or the previous year's, $20 million, so that's up about 36%. It has one ambition, and that is, it sees a bit of a gap in its network. It's going to open a branch in Auckland as soon as it can, and that might be to the plus. It's interesting to talk about the SBS and local banks because the big four banks in this country, as we all know, are owned by the Australians, and they've just all been downgraded by Moody's ratings agency because of the high level of Australian household debt. That will flow through to local rates. Probably it means that the local branches here, when they borrow overseas, they're probably going to have to pay a little bit more for it, and that will mean that local consumers will also pay a little bit more for it to look after the Australian housing risk.
I was thinking of all sorts of things I might want to say in reply to that.
Don't be uncharitable. Don't be uncharitable at all.
Thank you. What happened on the markets today?
Local shares, it did hit a record high during the session through the 7,600 level, John. It's just pulled itself back a wee bit, down 5 points to close at 7587. The New Zealand dollar nice and steady, 72.5 euro cents, 95.3 Australian. And overnight we'll have, of course, the latest dairy auction.
Oh, that's right,
which will have some sort of influence on the currency if it's large to any extent.
And we'll be covered on Morning Report tomorrow morning, right? Giles
Undoubtedly.
Giles Beckford, our business editor, thank you so much. District health boards have considered a vote of no confidence in senior leadership at the Ministry of Health over a $38 million blunder in the sector's funding. The matter was raised in Parliament today and an urgent debate was held about it. Kate Gudsall reports.
Earlier this month, it was revealed $38 million from the budget was incorrectly allocated to district health boards, and the Minister of Health, Jonathan Coleman, blamed officials. Some DHBs were asked to return money to the ministry. Yet several DHB heads have told RNZ News that at the end of May, beginning of June, the Director General of Health, Chai Chua, and the Director of Critical Projects, Michael Hundleby, rang them to say they could keep the money. It's also been confirmed that a series of meetings were held in Wellington on the 15th of June, where the chairs and chief executives discussed their lack of confidence in Mr Chua. Labour's health spokesperson David Clark raised this during a snap debate in Parliament.
When they were called into Wellington, the chairs and the chief executives of the DHBs, to meet with the ministry, and the minister admitted today in response to questions in the House that he wasn't aware of this, so once again we see he's not across his portfolio. They considered whether they would put forward a vote of no confidence in the Director General. It has happened once too often. This is a sector that is distressing of the leadership in the Ministry of Health.
Dr Coleman responded.
That was a mix of gross exaggeration, wild allegations, personal, very deeply hurtful personal attacks that he's made on me, but much more seriously, actually, the bullying of an outstanding public servant, Chai Chua.
For most DHBs, the error was worth between $1 and $2 million, with 14 getting more than they should and 6 getting less. Dr Clark described the situation like this.
This is a story of a minister who doesn't care about his sector. It's a story of a ministry that is demoralised and struggling with senior leadership issues, and it is a story about our sector that is growing incredibly frustrated as their efforts to provide healthcare to New Zealanders who deserve it are frustrated time and time and time again.
During question time, Dr Clark put it to the Minister that the DHBs had been told they could keep the extra money 2 weeks before the blunder became public.
When they worked out that there was something wrong, the Ministry rang the DHBs and said, if you have extra money in this budget, we know it's tight, if you've got a little bit extra in your pot, we'll let you keep it.
But Dr Coleman said it wasn't a matter that made a difference to the public.
I'm quite happy, Mr Speaker, if the Labor Party wants to continue to focus on beltway matters, on technical errors, and yes, it was an error that the Ministry of Health made, but on the minutiae rather than the big debates.
Dr Clark told Dr Coleman he should hang his head in shame because there's much more to come on this. For Checkpoint, ko Kate Godsall tēnei.
There are calls for calm in London after yesterday's attack on worshippers outside a mosque. One person was killed and 9 others injured when a white van was driven up onto the pavement and into a group of people as they left the Finsbury Park mosque after late-night services as part of Ramadan. The driver is in custody but has been identified as 47-year-old father of 4, Darren Osborne from Cardiff. His family say they are in shock. With more from London, here's the ABC's Stephen Smiley.
At a vigil in Finsbury Park, members of the North London community are still coming to terms with the attack. Nasima is the sister of one of the 9 people injured.
When I saw my brother, I was traumatised. I couldn't believe it until I had to look at him and I was like, is it you? He's like, listen, I'm fine. Don't worry about me. But obviously I can see that he's not fine. He's finding it really hard to breathe. Literally had to rip off his jacket, rip off his T-shirt.
For Nasima and her friend Marwa, a big part of their shock is they no longer feel safe at their place of worship.
The mosque for us is a peaceful place. It just makes you think, like, if that's happening somewhere where we're supposed to be safe, where is safe?
It's a question many are asking in the UK as the country grapples with its 4th terrorist attack in less than 3 months. At a gathering of Christian, Jewish, Sikh and Muslim leaders at the scene of the Finsbury incident, the local mosque's chairman, Mohammed Kosbar, vowed his community would rally.
An attack on one faith is an attack on all faith and communities. Those who try to divide us will not succeed.
The London Mayor Sadiq Khan was also at the vigil, promising to increase security around mosques in the city.
One of the things that all these terrorists share is a perverse ideology that wants to fuel division and divide our communities. We're not going to let them.
In the Welsh city of Cardiff, there's shock too that 47-year-old white British man and local father of 4, Darren Osborne, has been arrested over the North London attack. Police say it looks like an attack motivated by hatred, with witnesses reporting the attacker called out, "I'm going to kill Muslims." Interviewed on ITV in Britain, the man's mother has spoken of her shock.
I'm not going to defend him, but it's my son, and it's a terrible, terrible shock, and it's not just robbing the bank or it's an atrocity, and I just at the moment in time I can't cope with it. I can't.
Other neighbours have described Osborne as mad, but one of the accused attacker's neighbours, Khadija, says she's struggling to reconcile what she knew of the man next door with the ongoing investigation.
He seemed like an everyday guy. I see walking the dogs, walking the kids to school and back, just doing everyday things like everyone else. Just, he's never unpleasant to me or nothing, and we've only been here since April, and I just didn't suspect him of anything like that, or that his views were that strong. And that even hated Muslims, so that's being Muslim as well.
In the wake of the latest attack, police are stepping up their patrols around mosques across the UK. Qari Azim is the imam of a mosque in Leeds in Yorkshire. He says while his community understands why that's needed, many British Muslims just want to get on with their lives undisturbed.
We're grateful for the patrolling of the police around the mosque, but at the same time, I think we do not want to give in to these extremists by having, all sorts of measures, security measures around the mosques. No, these are public spaces. We want to carry on with our normal lives. We will not be restricted in our values and freedoms.
That was Imam Qari Azim ending that report by the ABC's Stephen Smiley. It's coming up to 5:45. You're with Checkpoint. Let's leave terrorism in London and go across to France, where counter-terrorism officials are investigating an attack in which a driver crashed a car loaded with guns, explosives and a gas bottle into a police van on Paris's famed Champs-Élysées. The man died at the scene. No one else was injured. It's been revealed he was on a terror watch list. The BBC's Tim Allman has the details.
The Champs-Élysées, one of the world's most famous avenues, brought to a standstill. Yellow smoke billows out of a car in the distance. The vehicle had hit a police van. Yet another attack on the streets of Paris.
As it's really hot at the moment, I thought to myself, oh, it's a problem with the car. It's caught fire. It could happen to anyone. But then when I saw the weird yellow smoke, I thought to myself, maybe it's an attack. Maybe we're in serious danger.
The driver died at the scene. It's believed he had been on France's security watch list since 2015 over alleged links to radical Islam.
There were several weapons inside the car, including explosives, which were powerful enough to blow the vehicle up. Once again, this shows that the threat level in France is extremely high.
So high, the country has been under a state of emergency for nearly 2 years. First introduced in November 2015, when the Paris attacks took place. At least 130 people were killed, many more were injured. It was then extended the following year, when a Tunisian man deliberately drove a lorry through Bastille Day crowds in Nice. 86 people lost their lives. The latest deadly attack came in April this year, when a police officer was shot dead, again on the Champs-Élysées. The French government says new legislation to bring the state of emergency to a close will be unveiled this week. But ministers insist new laws will be needed to keep the citizens of France safe.
That report from Tim Allman from the ABC. In about 3 or 4 minutes, we understand Todd Barclay, the MP for Clutha Southland, of course, very much in the news and at the beginning of Checkpoint tonight, is going to have a media stand-up. That is an impromptu media conference in the corridors of Parliament. We will be taking it live. Fire experts in Portugal are looking to Australian-style warning systems as thousands of firefighters continue to battle a devastating blaze. At least 62 people have been killed. The fire is believed to have been started by a lightning strike at the weekend. Survivors have been sharing stories of dramatic escape, but locals are struggling to understand how so many people died trying to flee the inferno. The BBC's James Reynolds has sent this report.
Flames of Portugal's worst disaster for more than a quarter of a century. For a third day here in the centre of the country, forests burn. On Saturday, flames quickly engulfed this road. The fire caught families who'd been trying to drive to safety. It's hard to conceive of their last minutes.
Portugal has more forest fires than any other country in southern Europe. It's had years to make proper preparations, and yet dozens lost their lives in the fire.
The village of Nordeirinho watched the fires approach. A dozen residents jumped into this water tank to escape. 84-year-old Marta de Conceição was helped in by her daughter. Oh God, it was awful, she tells me. Like hell. The rescue efforts continues during a 3-day period of national mourning. The country now asks why its most isolated residents were left to save themselves.
Former All Black Zach Guildford says hitting rock bottom a year ago had him contemplating suicide. Guildford's journey back to professional rugby has taken another step today when he signed to play for Waikato in the national provincial competition. Alcohol and off-field problems have plagued Guildford's career, culminating with the New South Wales Waratahs terminating his Super Rugby contract last year. The 28-year-old Guildford, who was part of the 2011 World Cup winning All Blacks, hasn't given up on returning to the All Blacks, but told our sports editor Stephen Hewson leaving the Waratahs marks the lowest point of his career.
Hitting rock bottom, this time last year, that definitely helped. I realised there were going to be no more contract handouts, and if I wanted to keep playing rugby, then I had to work bloody hard, and that's what I did. I went away and played in the Heartland, and then come to Waikato through sevens and in the club competition, and I haven't been paid to do this for a long time, so to be back in the semi-professional environment with Waikato, I'm very grateful, and it's pretty cool.
I mean, I know you've sort of had the odd chat with New Zealand Rugby Union. Have they given you an indication of where they need to see you at if you're going to sort of return to full-time professional rugby?
Not really. I talked with them back in January, and they still weren't keen, but I guess them giving me the green light to play in the Mitre 10 Cup is a bit of hope for myself that maybe one day they'll be in a position to let me play Super Rugby again, or for high honours, all going well, I guess, with my form and off the field, but I don't really know too much, to be honest.
How difficult has it been, or how supportive have you found it? Because, I mean, the mental health side of things is obviously a lot of talk and discussion, particularly, the death of former players and things to suicide. I mean, has that made this journey a little easier for you?
Yeah, I guess, now mental health, no one's running away from it, and, when people come forward to speak about their problems, people are applauding them, and you have guys like, I guess, Mike King, who are the forefront of that sort of stuff, and that's cool, and I think that's what we need in rugby, more guys coming forward, and, life's not all sunshine and lollipops at professional rugby, like, we are just normal guys who play rugby, so I guess the more that can be put out there, the more to help our younger generation.
When you say things got to rock bottom, how low did they get? Did you contemplate suicide?
Oh, look, I definitely had those thoughts. I was in a pretty bad situation where I come back from Waratahs, and I wasn't in a good headspace, so I need to surround myself with family and good people through that time, and that's what helped me get through. And after a couple of months, I picked up the rugby ball again and realised I still loved it. So, I've been playing a bit of club footy and Heartland stuff since then, and managed to get myself back into a position, headspace, where I can, where I think I can reach my full potential again.
I see you've been doing a few sort of programs, speaking at schools and things with Mike King. What's that entail?
Having been down a similar track as Mike, and I guess some of the kids that do struggle with a lot of things in their personal life, I can relate to them, and it's always easier coming from someone that's been down a similar path and has struggled a wee bit. Maybe I can relate to those younger kids a bit more, but I guess for myself, I've got a lot of personal development I still need to do before I can, really help those kids.
It's Zach Guildford talking to our sports editor, Stephen Hewson. We've got a live shot coming in from the ground floor of the old Parliament buildings in Wellington. We are waiting for Todd Barclay to have a media conference. He has announced that he will be having one at 10 to 6. It's now 7:30 to 6. We will cross live to it the moment it starts. But before that, 26,000 school children skipped classes to go on holiday in a single term last year, and on average they were absent for an entire week. Education Ministry figures show nearly 5% of children went on holiday during term 2, with Asian children the most likely to take term time holidays. Here he is. Todd Barclay has just arrived. We're going to go live there now.
I'd just like to make a statement, which I'll read from. It's important that I clarify and correct my comments to the media earlier today. I've read Mr English's statement to the police and accept it. The period in question was a very stressful one, and as I was in the midst of a difficult employment dispute. Given Mr English was my predecessor as the MP for Cleveland Southland, I no doubt spoke to him as the dispute escalated. Like any breakdown in a relationship, I accept that there was fault on both sides. Looking back, I could have handled the situation differently, and I regret that. I shouldn't have been as specific in my comments to the media today about the allegations. For legal reasons, I'm unable to comment further. The employment dispute has been resolved and is subject to the confidentiality agreement. As I've said in the past, this has been a steep learning curve for me, and I still have a lot to learn. I'm sorry if any of the answers I gave this morning were misleading anyway.
Do you accept now that you told... Well, that is quite an extraordinary state of affairs. So Todd Barclay has turned up and read a statement which is at best a qualified mea culpa. highly qualified, and he is left without taking questions. We're just going to get our political editor Jane Patterson on the phone, but quite a remarkable state of affairs, I think, given that Mr. Barclay announced he was having a media conference at 10 to 6. People might have reasonably expected something more substantive and robust than that. We'll just take stock and reconfigure. In the meantime, let's go back to those 36,000 school children who skip classes. School principals say some trips are educational, but children are better off in the classroom. Our education correspondent, John Gerritsen, has filed this report.
Sue McMillan and her 12-year-old daughter Mara are flying to Greece for a family wedding. Speaking from Wellington Airport, she says Mara will be missing 3 weeks of intermediate school, but she won't be missing an education.
My mum is an ex-correspondence school teacher, so she's put together this set that Mara's going to work on every day as we go from Athens through to Thessaloniki and then over to Skopolis. We're going to be visiting museums and galleries and Byzantine churches, so she's going to pick up a lot of information as we travel.
Sue McMillan says she wouldn't have taken Mara out of school for so long without planning some sort of schoolwork.
To take her out of school for 3 weeks, we'd have to weigh that up, that she's actually learning as we go. I wouldn't like her to just go off to Disneyland for a month. So by going to Greece, we feel that she's going to be taking on a lot.
Education Ministry figures show 36,000 children, or nearly 6% of those surveyed, took an average 1 week off school for a holiday during Term 2 last year. Sharon Keane from the Association of Intermediate and Middle Schools says that's a lot.
This figures are certainly higher than I would have expected. The last week of Term 2 is when we often do lose children to overseas travel. I guess that's people travelling to a warmer climate at the middle of our winter and things.
The president of the Secondary Principals Association, Mike Williams, says some trips are educational, but children are still missing out on school.
There's going to be a cost, and I suppose that's the point that we have to make to parents. There is a cost. So this might be an amazing educational experience for your kids, but there will be a cost in terms of their learning on other areas. So they will miss out on some other things. Ultimately, it's the parent who will make that choice around that. Is the cost worth it?
Mike Williams says attendance is strongly linked to achievement, but that doesn't stop families taking their children out of school for holidays.
It is a problem. We know we've got good evidence, good data that shows attendance is critical, and that late's a big contributor as well to underachievement. But parents will still make those decisions based on what they think's right for them and their children. It's disappointing as educators that sometimes we don't think those are right.
Phil Holstein from the Canterbury West Coast Secondary Principals Association says families are asked to seek permission before taking children away, but that doesn't always happen.
Bookings need to be made to get the best possible deals, and so they're made early. So we often are told in those circumstances just before they're leaving we're informed. Others will seek permission but have already purchased their travel arrangements, but I think that's important that at least the parents have informed the school.
The Education Ministry says it does not support in-term holidays, but it's up to schools and parents to make decisions about them. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. It's all on for young and old this evening. Todd Barclay, the embattled Clutha Southland MP, has just held what was called a media stand-up. It wasn't. Well, I suppose he was standing up and the media were there. He read a statement and then left immediately before answering any questions. In the statement, he says he should have handled the situation better, and he apologised for misleading statements he made this morning. This is all in response, of course, to a story that broke on Newsroom, which revealed all sorts of information that had previously not been known about the departure from his electorate office in Gore of a number of key staff members. One of them was Glenys Dixon, who had been there for a very long time and worked very closely with Bill English, highly regarded in the electorate. She seems not to have had a good relationship with Todd Barclay when he started there, and it became apparent through texts that Bill English sent to a man called Stuart Davey, and also a statement Bill English gave to the police, that Todd Barclay had recorded, without their knowledge, conversations taking place either via the phone or in the office, including Glenys Dixon. She left, was paid a more than usual departure fee as a result of the invasion of her privacy, and all of this was hushed, although there were lots of discussions in Southland around the secret recordings, but none of this was explicitly understood or made forensically clear until that newsroom investigation. Bill English had said he didn't recall what he knew. Greater clarification today as the day went on, saying he had indeed spoken to the police and he had indeed told them that there were, as far as he was aware, recordings. All of this was unfolding. Todd Barclay said he would have a media stand-up at 10 to 6, but he read that statement and departed. We are approaching 6 o'clock. We will talk to our political editor, Jane Patterson, about this after the news, and we'll also hear from Winston Peters for his take on this. He was certainly doing a lot of work in the House today during question time to try and hit this home to Todd Barclay. It's coming up to 6 o'clock. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The Clutha Southland MP, Todd Barclay, has apologised for what he says were misleading statements he made this morning. Statements the National MP made put him at odds with the Prime Minister. This morning, Mr Barclay denied recording his staff or speaking to Bill English about it. But this afternoon, Mr English released a statement he made to the police last year in which he says Mr Barclay told him he had recordings of an electorate staff member criticising him. Mr Barclay has just told reporters he should have handled the situation better. As Prime Minister, Mr English cannot technically force Mr Barclay to resign as an electorate MP, but the 27-year-old's first termer will now be facing serious questions about today's revelations and the pressure on Mr English as a result. The police said last year they had insufficient evidence to prosecute Mr Barclay, but say they'll reopen the case if relevant new information comes to light. The Auckland Council has allowed a commercial CBD building to stay open for nearly a year, despite acknowledging it's likely someone will die or be injured if it catches fire. The 5-storey Strand Arcade building at 233 Queen Street was deemed dangerous in June last year and is rated such a fire risk the fire service will not send in firefighters if it catches fire, neither to rescue people nor put it out. The council's compliance manager, Sally Gray, says that in the past year, the building's owners have done work to mitigate the imminent risks, including closing a food court and a backpackers. She says the council disagrees with the fire service's assessment. Considering the building not so unsafe, it needs to be closed. The police are denying that footage from inside the Pike River mine shows several intact bodies, as some families of the victims claim. The mother of one of the 29 men killed in the disaster, Sonia Rockhouse, says the bodies can be seen in footage she obtained under the Official Information Act. Logan Church reports.
Sonia Rockhouse says several bodies are visible in footage released to her by the police under the Official Information Act. However, the police say only one body has been potentially captured in the video. The minister responsible for Pike River, Nick Smith, hasn't seen all of the videos, but says police experts have ruled out the possibility of several bodies being visible. Mr Smith says there are no bodies in the first 1,500 metres inside the mine, known as the drift, although a 400 metre section remains unexplored. This is Logan Church.
The Labour leader Andrew Little says it was not in the country's national security interest for the GCSB to help a former national government minister's campaign to be appointed head of the World Trade Organisation. The Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, Cheryl Gwynne, investigated the matter after Mr Little complained. In a report out today, she finds the GCSB did nothing wrong by spying on Tim Gross's competitors in 2013. Ms Gwynne says the law at the time gave the spy agency a statutory responsibility to provide foreign intelligence assistance in support of New Zealand's foreign policies. Mr Little says he disagrees with that interpretation of the law, but won't be taking the matter any further. Demonstrators have condemned New Zealand's record on refugees, saying the government should match Australia's generosity. About 100 people gathered outside Parliament today to mark World Refugee Day, calling on politicians to significantly lift the country's refugee quota and asking individual MPs to pledge their support. On a per-person basis, New Zealand ranks 97th in the world for accepting refugees. Protest organiser Murdoch Stevens says there are two reasons for raising the quota.
to offer protection to people who don't have a home. They've been driven out of their land through no fault of their own. And secondly, because if you look at the numbers, we're really not pulling our weight. So if we want to be seen as a humanitarian nation, then we need to increase it to the likes of similar countries like Australia, Canada, Ireland, who do between 3, 4 or 5 times as much as us.
A protest organiser, Murdoch Stevens. Christchurch's rates are to go up by just under 5.5% in the financial year starting next month. Confirmed the budget for the year. City councillors also voted today in favour of free swimming at public pools for preschoolers and extra staff to help with the upkeep of parks. Just over $11 million has been found for a new hot saltwater pool at New Brighton to act as a tourist attraction and help revive an area that struggled since the earthquakes. More than $500 million will be spent on major infrastructure, including a new central library, the repair of the town hall and the Metro Sports facility, which includes a 50-metre swimming pool. It's 6:05. The former England rugby international Jeremy Guscott believes the British and Irish Lions jersey has been devalued by coach Warren Gatland. Gatland has bolstered his squad with 6 players, 4 from Wales and 2 from Scotland, which in effect lets him run 2 sides for the rest of the tour. He says they were added because they were in Australasia, and while the England side were further away, in Argentina and Ireland were in Japan. All 6 of the additional players are in the reserves for tonight's game against the Chiefs, and Guscott, a 3 times Lions tourist, isn't impressed.
He has devalued the jersey, there's no doubt. You would have to be there on merit, otherwise you just can't look someone in the eye and say, well done. What he's saying is really that he's wanting some fodder there. Why should anyone on a Lions tour be fodder? You should be there competing for a test spot.
Jeremy Guscott. The Auckland pole vaulter and Olympic bronze medalist Eliza McCartney will see a specialist in Germany about an Achilles injury that's affecting her European season. McCartney managed just 1 clearance in finishing 8th at the Diamond League meeting in Stockholm yesterday. Her manager Scott Newman says she's had the problem on and off for a while and it's flared up again. The New Zealand women's cricketers have warmed up for the World Cup tournament with a 7-wicket win over India in the English city of Derby. Their opening cup game is against Sri Lanka at the weekend. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights After 7, swearing has been shown to relieve physical pain when it comes to banging your toe or slamming a finger in the door. Now a new psychology study shows we shouldn't be coy about cursing when suffering from an aching heart or hurt feelings. More on that when we talk to the director of the Social Cognition Lab at Massey University's Manawatu campus after 7. After 8, we lean left with our night's pundit, and we end the evening with music. Trevor Reeke's Worlds of Music, celebrating an eclectic mix of music from right around the world. Join us after the news at 7 tonight. Nights RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Cloudy periods with showers over Northland and Coromandel. Rain with heavy falls and northeast gales developing about Northland tomorrow morning and spreading elsewhere later. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumaranui, Taranaki, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with isolated showers developing in Waikato and Bay of Plenty. Gisborne, mostly cloudy, showers developing tomorrow night. Hawke's Bay to Wairarapa, also Whanganui and Taihape through to Wellington, mainly fine. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago, Southland, also Nelson, Buller and Westland north of Hokitika, mainly fine, cloud increasing later tomorrow and scattered rain developing about Otago and Southland in the evening. For the remainder of Westland and Fiordland, showers developing overnight, turning to rain tomorrow afternoon with heavy falls, and the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods today, mainly fine tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Let's return to the Clutha Southland MP Todd Barclay, who's apologised for what he says were misleading statements. Presumably they were misleading statements this morning. The National MP statements this morning put him at odds with the Prime Minister, Bill English. This morning he denied recording his staff or speaking to Bill English about it, but this afternoon Mr English released a statement he made to the police last year in which he says Mr Barclay told him he had recordings of an electorate staff member criticising him. A newsroom revealed he'd also said something similar in a text to Stuart Davey. A dictaphone, I think, was mentioned from memory in that text. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, joins us now live from Parliament. Jane, are you there?
I am, John. Hello.
Yeah. Oh, there you are. I've got you loud and clear. With the echo, which suggests you are in the corridors of power. What did you make of Todd Barclay having a media stand-up, reading a statement, and then departing? Is that going to stop the conjecture about his future, stop the discussion, stop the criticism? Is that going to be the end of it?
No, John, it's not. And in fact, I think it raises more questions. So there's been quite a flurry here in the last 15 to 20 minutes. A media conference in Parliament at very short notice. Mr Barclay came out and read a statement just saying that he had read Bill English's statement to the police and that he accepted that statement. Now, Mr English told the police last year that he had a conversation with Todd Barclay regarding Glenys Dixon leaving his office, and he told Mr English that he had recordings of her criticising him and that those comments were made in a face-to-face conversation between Bill English and between Todd Barclay. Now, you just mentioned that Mr Barclay told media this morning that he had not made those statements. He has come out, he said that they were unwise, he could have handled it differently, and that no doubt in a stressful situation that he was dealing with, he would have talked to Mr English. But that still really raises the question of, is he now saying he made the recording, which, if it is as described, there are potential legal action or there are potential legal issues around that. And of course the police investigated this. They requested an interview with Todd Barclay on legal advice. He declined to talk to police, and they closed the investigation down for a lack of sufficient evidence to charge him. But I don't think this puts it to rest at all.
No. So Mr Barclay fronted the media this morning and said, I did not. And now he's saying Mr English is right. Well, Mr English said he did. And so where to from here? What happens next? It was a bizarre kind of non-management of the situation, wasn't it?
It was. And to be honest, the reporters that were called to this media conference did actually expect him to come out and say he was going to resign, but he is not. He is digging his heels in. But this leaves open a couple of avenues. The police have put out a statement saying that if there is other evidence, if there's new evidence relating to this case that casts any light on whether there was a secret recording, that Mr Barclay had any role in recording Ms Dixon at the electorate office, then they want to know about it. And also newsroom reporting. Late this afternoon, we have not been able to confirm this with electorate staff in Clutha Southland, but that his selection is being investigated. He was reselected earlier this year to contest the election. As I said, we haven't confirmed that, but that is another report. If that is the case, that is going to cause another issue for Mr Barclay. He is using his reselection as a sign of support from that electorate, as a reason to stay on. If that's no longer the case, that does make him more vulnerable.
Where does this leave Bill English? He's Todd Barclay's boss. He's the former MP in that electorate. He worked very closely and very successfully with Glenys Dixon, who is highly regarded in the Clutha Southland region. He seems to have sent a text. He seems to have given a statement saying that he knew about these recordings. How is he going to deal with all of this?
Well, interestingly, the political attacks are starting to fire up from the opposition, from New Zealand First and from Labour. While they mention Todd Barclay and his political career, they are focused on Bill English and how he has handled this. Now, also to note, last year when all this came up, RNZ News did cover this story. The text exchanges between Bill English and the former electorate chairman, Stuart Davey, happened in February, and that's when they discussed the potential, or that they discussed this recording, and the fact also, another element of the story, that there had been a confidentiality settlement partly funded by money from the Leaders Fund. Now, the next month, I talked to Mr English and I asked him what was going on, whether he had any concerns. He said he wasn't aware of any specific problems. He said he wasn't concerned that this was basically just a change. So really this new information throws big questions about the communications that were going on between senior national figures. That includes the former Prime Minister John Campbell, who was also asked about this on Radio New Zealand and downplayed it and certainly made no mention of that confidentiality settlement. So scrutiny not just on Todd Barclay but also on Mr English and his comments and actions over the past year or so.
Our political editor, Jane Patterson, joining us live from the corridors of Parliament. Thank you so much, Jane. We really appreciate it. As we said earlier in the program, we've asked Todd Barclay, we've asked Bill English, we've asked the National Party President onto the program, and none of them were available this evening. It's 40 minutes past 6. Thank you for being with us on an interesting day. A commercial building in Auckland CBD has been allowed to remain open for nearly a year, despite Auckland Council acknowledging in writing it's likely someone will die or be injured if it catches fire. Now, the 5-storey Strand Arcade building on Queen Street has been considered dangerous since June last year. It's such a fire risk, the fire service has said it won't send in firefighters to rescue people. It would only fight a fire there from the street. But Auckland Council hasn't issued any fines or blocked access to the building. Its compliance manager, Sally Gray, told Zach Fleming the council believed the only imminent risk was to people sleeping at a backpackers, so it ordered that closed.
There does take a period of time for those issues to be rectified. So it wasn't the case of dangerous building notice being served on this building and nothing then being done for 12 months. Where the risk was isolated, i.e. no longer a sleeping accommodation. Over the period of time leading up till Christmas, the food court was also closed, which further removed any potential fire risk within the building. And the other remaining items, which were assessed as much lower level, but still not compliant with the building code, have been addressed by the owner.
Right, but there's still clearly a risk because otherwise there wouldn't still be a dangerous building notice here. And you guys gave them until the 23rd of December last year to fix all of the problems, and now 6 months later they're still not fixed. I have a letter here from the council dated the 16th of March giving them 14 days to fix all the problems and get a warrant of fitness, or there will be prosecution proceedings commencing without further notice. Did those prosecution proceedings ever commence?
No, they didn't, because the landlord is working towards achieving building code compliance.
So is
and
it
really
sorry,
is
can
a
I just interrupt you?
graduated.
So is
well,
it
I
is
don't
it good
agree
enough?
that the building remains dangerous to the point that nobody can be in it at all. What we have assessed is the building would be dangerous if somebody were sleeping in there.
It can't just be sleeping though, because the fire service deemed the building so dangerous that they wouldn't go in to rescue people or fight a fire. So it can't just be sleeping.
You would have to ask them why they take that position.
Right.
I simply don't know why they would take that view.
Okay. Well, so if I was driving down the road in my car and it didn't have a warrant, if a policeman pulled me over, he would issue me with a fine on the spot. There's never any lenience if a car doesn't have a warrant, because I'm putting both
they are
myself
similar circumstances.
because I'm putting both myself and other people at risk. Whereas in this case, this building has had a dangerous building notice for nearly a year. And there's been no fines or no prosecutions despite numerous threats. I'm just wondering why those threats have been made, but nothing has ever been pushed through.
Well, a notice to fix has certain language in it because it's a statutory notice. But when you have owners and body corporates working towards the building being compliant and the experts going through and not assessing it as risking life and limb for those who are using it for non-sleeping purposes, to prosecute is not productive at all. So I don't agree with your comment that for 12 months nothing has happened. There's been a lot of work happen over that time. Tenants have been involved in all discussions, as have the building owners and the fire service and NB.
Right, so, but these buildings are at the very worst end of non-compliance. That's why they have dangerous building notices. So is a year satisfactory as far as the council is concerned to fix these problems?
There has been a lot of work done over the last 12 months to get this building to compliance. And I think we need to go back to my original comment. You're calling the whole building dangerous. We don't consider the whole building dangerous. We considered there was a danger to occupants if they were sleeping in there. And that is the danger, rather than the building being dangerous.
Hey, Sally, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think is quite important to get across?
I would just like to stress again that your view that a dangerous building notice means the entire building is unsafe is actually incorrect.
Well, that's not really my view. It's the New Zealand Fire Service's view. They deem the building to be too unsafe to undertake firefighting and rescue operations in.
you would have to ask them why they have that view.
Right, I'm just saying it's not my view, it's the fire service's view.
Thank you for your time.
That's Zach Fleming, the reporter there. The time is 90 minutes past 5. Tension between the Pike River families and the government is at boiling point over claims that newly released video footage reveals several intact bodies inside the mine. 29 men died, of course, when the West Coast mine exploded in 2010, and their remains have been trapped there ever since. Sonia Rockhouse, whose son Ben Rockhouse was one of the victims. Of course, Daniel, her other son, was one of 2 men who got out, says she discovered images of several bodies after obtaining hours of footage from the police under the Official Information Act. Logan Church reports.
Sonia Rockhouse is poring through the footage taken by a robot from inside the Pike River mine, searching for answers about why her son, Ben Rockhouse, died in the explosion. After being told by the governments that the mine would have been a fireball during the explosion, she says she made a surprising discovery.
There are a couple of bodies that are recognisable as bodies, and we can see that they are intact. There are some other images that we have seen that are not so clear and appear to be intact as well.
Earlier this week, further footage was released of wooden pallets and equipment in the mine which appear to be unscathed by fire. However, the minister responsible for Pike River, Nick Smith, says the police haven't seen any footage of bodies. Nick Smith says there is no bodies in the first 1,500 metres of the mine, known as the drift, although a 400-metre section remains unexplored.
They have viewed all of the footage, and they had specialists doing that work, and they have not identified any video that provides images of bodies.
Nick Smith says he hasn't seen all the footage himself and is relying on police experts. In a statement to RNZ News, the police say it is widely known that footage taken from within the mine has potentially captured an image of a body, but they think it is just one rather than several bodies. They say the family should contact the police if they believe they can see images which show more bodies. But Sonia Rockhouse says the authorities are continuing to keep Pike River families in the dark.
Had we known about this footage 6 years ago, we definitely wouldn't be sitting here talking now. Up until a certain point, everything was all go for the re-entry. John Key was in favour. I've got letters from John Key. Other ministers too, I've got letters from them saying the same thing. And then all of a sudden, we came to a dead stop.
The Labour leader, Andrew Little, says the newly released footage proves that the government needs to re-enter the mine.
The new video footage coming out of Pike River does give more compulsion to the idea that the government's got to work with the families to get re-entry to the mine so that we know what's going on. Like, I sympathise with the families who are fearful that this looks like it's being pushed past the election so nothing might happen.
Sonia Rockhouse says she won't release any more details about the footage that depicts the bodies until she has consulted with the families of the other Pike victims. For Checkpoint, call Logan Church 10A.
In the meantime, of course, Solid Energy is organising an unmanned entry, a robotic entry into the mine to see what they can find in a very specific area where it's thought bodies may be. How is that going? Yesterday they said it was progressing well. Well, earlier on Checkpoint, we asked Tony King, Solid Energy's CEO, to elaborate. If you missed it, that interview is now available online. 6:22. Demonstrators at Parliament have condemned New Zealand's record on refugees, saying the government should match Australia's generosity. New Zealand currently lets in 750 refugees annually, plans to increase that to 1,000 next year. More than 100 people gathered outside Parliament today to mark World Refugee Day, calling on politicians to significantly lift the country's refugee quota and asking individual MPs to pledge their support to that campaign. Our reporter Catherine Hutton went along.
Karim Shah is from Syria, forced to leave his homeland after authorities found out he was organising protests against the government. He was given a week to get out of the country.
In Syria, you're a criminal if you try to say anything against the government. You would be just accused of terrorism. You would be described as an anarchist.
Fadima Aboka left Yemen 4 years ago with her husband. She says her new home is very different to the one she left behind.
There is so many rules that you need to follow and you can't break them. And if you do, you're going to pay for that.
Anna Mendez came to New Zealand 10 months ago as part of the family reunification program after her father was forced to flee Colombia. Like the other refugees, she spoke of the delight of living in New Zealand.
Everyone deserves a good life with freedom and with a place when you can realize your dreams, because sometimes in your country you cannot.
On a per-person basis, New Zealand ranks 97th in the world for accepting refugees. Protest organiser Murdoch Stevens, who founded the Doing Our Bit campaign 4 years ago, says there are 2 reasons why New Zealand should increase its refugee quota.
To offer protection to people who don't have a government, they don't have a home, they've been driven out of their land through no fault of their own. And secondly, because if you look at the numbers, we're really not pulling our weight. So if we want to be seen as a humanitarian nation, then we need to increase it to the likes of similar countries like Australia, Canada, Ireland, who do between 3, 4 or 5 times as much as us. So it's not making us a world leader, it's really just getting up to the middle of the pack.
Mr Shah says New Zealand's quota is far too low, lagging well behind Australia and other developed countries. He thinks it's a question of knowledge.
People do not know the numbers, so it's actually expected for people to be afraid for their jobs, to be afraid for how their government spends their money. But for the case of New Zealand, the problem is people do not know that this quota has been in place for decades.
Mr Stevens agrees.
There was a poll last week that said a quarter of New Zealanders thought we took 10,000 people or more. So there's a quarter of New Zealanders who will be pretty happy with the Green Party going down to 5,000 from whatever they thought it was. Yeah, there is a lack of knowledge, and I don't blame people. People have their own concerns.
That same poll found only a quarter favouring increasing the quota to more than 1,000, with 3/4 supporting 1,000 or less. Back at Parliament and the protest of the mostly white urban crowd believing the quota should be doubled.
This is a global crisis and I'm a little embarrassed that New Zealand, we're not doing our bit.
I think doubling the quota should be the start. I think that having a sponsorship program where people can sponsor people to come like Canada would be a great response. Yeah.
Mr Stevens now plans to take his campaign to 17 centres from Invercargill to Whangarei. For Checkpoint, Catherine Hutton.
6:26, there will be a capacity crowd at tonight's Lions-Chiefs game at Waikato Stadium. The Lions have so far won 3 and lost 2 matches on their tour, having beaten the Barbarians, Canterbury and the Māori on Saturday night. The Māori team, the Lions beat them fairly comfortably in the end and lost to the Highlanders and the Blues. It's an important game because the team for Saturday's test in Auckland is decided and announced tomorrow. The Chiefs won't roll over easily. It's likely to be a cracker. Our reporter Andrew McRae is outside Waikato Stadium and joins us now via live view. Now, Andrew, we should say in advance that you are a wonderful Waikato reporter rather than a rugby reporter, right? And they are somewhat different disciplines. So I'm not going to grill you on pack weights or any of that stuff. But I can observe behind you that it is a beautiful, clear evening. Is it going to stay like that for the duration of the game, do you think?
Yeah, good evening, John. Yes, it is. It's quite a balmy evening for this time of year. It's quite, it's not chilly at all, and a large crowd is flocking in at the moment. As you said, a capacity crowd's expected. 30,000 people. Wow. And just you might see over my shoulder if you're watching on screen, a temporary stand has been put up, so an extra 5,000 on top of the normal 25,000 people that can be packed into Waikato Stadium. Majority, of course, are home supporters, that's to be expected, but it's been noticeable today and tonight here at the stadium. A large number of Lions supporters in their red have come in, and quite a few characters, of course, as you can see. But I think, a lot of the locals here are expecting a Chiefs win. Don't forget that Waikato, a bit of a history of beating the Lions back in 1973, I think it was. They won something like 48-10. The local provincial side, Waikato, beat Wales last year, basically quite a big score. And so there's a sort of a feeling here that just possibly the Chiefs may be able to beat the Lions. You wouldn't put your house on it, of course. The All Blacks that are normally on the Chiefs side aren't there tonight, so they're going to be lining up behind Stephen Donald, who, of course, is a local hero around here. And you can just guarantee that when he goes out onto the field tonight, there'll be a huge cheer, John.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he's a local hero everywhere, Stephen Donald. For people who are listening who can't remember Stephen Donald, he was the guy wearing a shirt about 7 sizes too small for him, who kicked the goal in the 2011 World Cup final at Eden Park. Beaver is beloved by almost everyone in the game. Just before you go, Andrew, I'm really interested that the Lions have picked their midweek team. The Chiefs don't have their All Blacks, and that's really important. Have you spoken to any Lions fans? What are they saying about the Lions side, this midweek side? There is an increasing sense of disconnection about them, isn't there?
Well, there's a feeling, of course, that the midweek side is going to be different from the Test side, but Warren Gatland at a press conference on Sunday here stressed that anyone playing tonight for Lions still has a chance. He's not going to pick his side until tomorrow. So there's a lot on the line for the Lions side. So they're going to play as if it is a major Test match, and the Chiefs, of course, don't want to go away being beaten. So it's going to be a cracker of a game.
Yeah, cracker of a game on an absolutely beautiful evening. People already rolling in, and kick-off's an hour away. Andrew McRae joining us from outside the Waikato Stadium. Thank you so much, Andrew. With my friend Tim, I went to the Māori Lions game at that stadium in 2005. We were much younger then, and the haka after the Māori won is something I will never forget. Thank you for being with us. Checkpoint will be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. National's Todd Barclay has apologised for misleading statements he made today about recordings of a staff member criticising him. A commercial building in Auckland's Queen Street is still open despite the council acknowledging it's likely someone will die or be injured if it catches fire. The police are denying that Pike River mine footage shows several bodies intact. The former All Black, Zach Guildford, admits he hit rock bottom a year ago and contemplated suicide. And Christchurch ratepayers are hit with a rise of under 5.5% from next month. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Oh, those great whites, they have big teeth. Oh, they bite you.
4 years after she became an international teenage star, Lorde has a new album. I'm Nick Bollinger.